Hey everyone. So as promised, this is our special topics. Rather, our first of two special topics. Like I said, I paid attention closely to your initial discussion board post and then your discussions along the way. So I have picked topics that are at least in some level interesting to a good portion of you. So, if you've posted about one of the topics that we're going to talk about today, obviously you were part of the first group, which was the bigger one. I'm going to be straightforward. The whole reason why on the syllabus it says special topics A and special topics B is because I don't know what we were going to talk about until I heard from you. So now that I know who you are and what you're thinking about, we are going to discuss those things. So first and foremost, I will say for those of you that are really interested in juvenile justice, we will talk juvenile justice in that course. So take that course. But if you're not sure you want to go into it, we will spend some of our special topics B during week 8. We will talk about some juvenile justice stuff there. It'll be a little soft entry into that class. So if you're interested in juvenile justice, this is not the week we're going to be talking about it. Obviously, there's only a discussion board about this topic this week, and so we'll look at that here, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the thoughts. So obviously, if you go into our folders under week 4, obviously we have the midterm in here. And so, you have 2 hours, like I said in the intro video, which is there. You get 2 hours to do the exam, and it's all here. But here, I don't know why it's still hidden. It should be visible. But anyway, special topics A, discussion board 4. And I'm going to go over this, and then I'm going to dive into what I have prepared for all of you, rather. So in the first few weeks, we talked a lot about the basics of the criminal justice system. Like, we've done it to death, but of course, it's the fundamentals. It's the most important things that you have to have a basic understanding of before we can dive deeper into the criminal justice system. So, if you paid close attention especially in week 2 and week 3, while that was the focus, was more on the legal proceedings, the courtroom, how that works, and constitutional rights and law, which again are important for any aspect of criminal justice. Now, starting next week, we're going to get into the policing side and then the correction side. So we are moving through. So thinking about that, we talked about constitutional rights and law. So this week, outside of the midterm, we're going to talk very briefly about social and political movements in the criminal justice field. Obviously, this is going to be a very brief overview. There's just not enough time. I could make like a 5 or 6 hour video talking about all the different movements, and even then it wouldn't cover them all. So we're going to talk about a couple ones here today. If you know of other political, social, change, whatever it may be, movements in the criminal justice field that we don't talk about today, feel free to talk about it, because that's kind of what this discussion board is for. So I want you to share your thoughts you have on the movements that we talk about today, as well as any movements that you know of that we did not talk about. So this is the most casual discussion board that you're going to have. I want to see your honest thoughts about these movements. So remember our respect agreement. Don't use hate language or anything like that. You're allowed to have strong feelings about any of these movements, but don't go after one another for it. It's your opinion. You're allowed to. You can engage in a discussion as long as it's appropriate. So I want your honest thoughts about these movements, and if you know about another movement, talk about it. Bring it up. Maybe I haven't heard of it. Maybe some of your classmates are like, ooh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about it. Feel free to share. You have this really cool information that we don't have. But the other thing here is that the due date is technically Monday the 19th at 11:59, same time as the midterm is due. But because I didn't make this live until Wednesday, obviously I am going to allow late entries. So I won't consider it late as long as I get it by next week, Wednesday, the 21st of September by midnight. Otherwise, that's the discussion board. So we're going to be talking about specific social and political movements in the criminal justice field. And truly, I think there's no better way to start this than talk about the big ones right now. And so that's our focus today is we're going to talk about the big movements, and then we're going to talk about one other one that was mentioned by a couple individuals early on. So let's talk about Black Lives Matter. So this is their official website. I'm not going to include all these links because it's just going to bog down that one folder. You can look all these things up on your own. But in case you weren't aware, because we tend to get lost in the history, Black Lives Matter it got its starting in 2013 in response of the Trayvon Martin case. And if you don't remember the Trayvon Martin case, Trayvon Martin was a young black individual who was wearing a hoodie and was shot by an off-duty police officer, if I remember right, in a private neighborhood. And he didn't have a weapon on him. He had candy and stuff from the store. So, like, this was the start of this movement. I'll be 100% honest. When this case happened and I first heard the hashtag Black Lives Matter show up, I started paying attention to this. So I have been following Black Lives Matter since 2013. So I have been following them for almost a decade. So when people say, oh, it's only happened since George Floyd, no, this has been around a lot longer. It's equally as important, but okay. So the big thing with Black Lives Matter is it is a response to I'm trying to choose my words very carefully. It is the perceived systemic racism within the criminal justice system. As we've talked about in our text, as we've seen in the notes, as we've gone through this, the system itself in a perfect world would not be inherently racist. But because of some particular factors and individual decision making and opinions of people, there is a perceived racist undertone where we have a larger quantity of Black and Latinx individuals getting arrested for crimes that are disproportionately not just them. We can dive into all that, but Black Lives Matter is a response in particular to police brutality in the engagement with Black individuals. And again, it's not saying that all cops are inherently racist, or it's not saying anything. It's just saying that we need to get rid of this bias, this white supremacy that seems to be a part of a good number of these communities. And so remember, one of the things that a police officer is supposed to do is serve the community and give back to the community. And so when it's seen that white supremacists are part of it, the people of color, regardless of what group they're in, you're not going to feel that kind of connection. And so the Black Lives Matter movement has been about removing individuals who have these racial and racist biases out of the criminal justice field so that it's a safer place. Not directly related to Black Lives Matter, but anyone that's familiar with training for police, and this is possibly something we'll talk about in a future class, but a lot of police officers aren't trained in dealing with people with autism and people on the spectrum. And this is a serious issue because there have been cases of individuals on the spectrum who have been violently put into some kind of cuffing system or some kind of preventing them. I'm trying to think of, like I said, I'm trying to be very specific with my words and not be biased one way or another. But this was a case, there was quite a few cases of individuals on the spectrum who were not treated appropriately by police officers because they were not aware of those barriers of understanding. And so that's why I'm saying Black Lives Matter, their focus is on racism, specifically against the black community, but it's not exclusive. Which is a good segue to All Lives Matter and why this is kind of a problem. Now, obviously, you can see I pulled up the Wikipedia page for it. All Lives Matter is, in theory, a good idea. The problem is that it was a response to Black Lives Matter. So rather than saying, everyone matters, it's Black Lives Matter is not saying that black lives are the most important. They're saying that there's been a disproportionately high number of black individuals whose lives seem to not care. All Lives Matter kind of diminishes the impact that it's had on individuals who are black that have dealt with that. And that's not what it should be. So that's why I was very careful with how I phrased the things about Black Lives Matter. The All Lives Matter movement really was a response to Black Lives Matter, but because of that, it ended up not being appropriate. So the idea behind it is perfect. It's saying that everyone should be treated equally. And yeah, we do need to talk about that. All lives matter do matter. That was a terribly phrased sentence. Apologies from an English teacher. All Lives Matter as a movement is important. It's important to know that, yes, I don't think anyone is really trying to make the argument that, at least I would honestly say, knowing the people who have started and have been running the Black Lives Matter movement, none of them are thinking that black lives are more important than others. They're simply saying that there has been a disservice to the black community. And so on that note, I'm saying, yes, all lives matter, but we don't need to have a separate little slogan and movement to say that. I think we all know that all lives matter, but we're just trying to handle one thing at a time. And so obviously All Lives Matter was the counter movement to Black Lives Matter, but there was another counter movement. And again, remembering 2013 is Black Lives Matter, we need to talk about Blue Lives Matter. So this is another group that has been around longer than people tend to think about. So really, 100%, it is a counter movement to the Black Lives Matter. Plain and simple. That's not assumption. That's not just Wikipedia. That is legitimate. They were a counter movement because of a particular Black Lives Matter person, a person who was big on this movement the year after it happened. So 2014, this began, the Blue Lives Matter movement, and Black Lives Matter was 2013. So this idea was an individual who believed and supported the Black Lives Matter movement killed 2 New York City police officers that really didn't have anything to do with anything. And that was kind of the problem, is the individual who killed these 2 officers also shot his ex-girlfriend, was not totally mentally stable, could have benefited from actual psychiatric help and looking at before any of this happened, but that's neither here nor there. That's long since happened. But the idea is the Blue Lives Matter movement started because, well, now police officers were being targeted by people who flew the banner of Black Lives Matter. And that's why this really started. And now the important thing to note here, ladies and gentlemen, because remember, these are inherently political and inherently dangerous to talk about. It was not saying that all Black Lives Matter individuals were committing crimes against officers. Even the people at the time in charge of the Black Lives Matter movement and several individuals who were parts of different communities like the NAACP, when these happened, they denounced them and said, the movement and our ideas are not about retribution and killing officers. It's not about that. So it's important to note that while this is an understandable counter movement, inherently the Black Lives Matter movement is not anti Blue Lives Matter or anti police. That's a very different group, and we're going to talk about them here in a minute. But the big thing, and I'll even pull up the official Blue Lives Matter website, just like I did with Black Lives Matter. 100%. Their whole mission is that, police officers and to a larger extent, first responders. So the main focus is law enforcement, but Blue Lives Matter has been extended to include firefighters and like EMTs. But in general, it's the idea that, hey, they need support as well because they're going through tough times. They are being targeted because of their job and things like that. And so legitimately, it's not inherently a bad mission. It's saying, respect the individuals who are there and doing the job. And obviously, if you're in this class and you have some kind of goal to be a police officer, you can understand this. And that's why I'm saying it's not a bad movement in the way it's saying it. And much like all lives matter, there's a couple things where it misses the mark. And we are going to talk about that. And that's strictly coming from how you designate hate crime. And we've talked about it before. If you remember, when we talked about a hate crime, it's discriminatory against someone's race, sexuality, religion, etc. Something that's not often put under there is occupation. And the reason is because you can change your occupation. You can't change your sexuality, really, honestly, if we're being serious. You can't change your gender realistically. You can't change, there are things that you really can't change. Yes, I know the way I phrased that might not have been totally appropriate. Let me rephrase this. Your gender identity, once you've decided upon your gender identity, you typically don't change it. Once you've decided what your gender is. So if you identify as a male, you tend to not change your gender from male to something else. If you identify as a female, you tend to not change that. Once you've discovered and established your identity, you don't change it. Same with religion. Yes, you can figure out what religion you want, but once you find it, you typically don't leave your religion. Once you figure out your sexuality, what your preferences are, you tend to not, flip-flop back and forth. You don't go one day, oh, I'm going to be gay, and the next day, oh, I'm going to be straight. That's not what you do. But with a career, with a job, you can make that choice. Now, there's debates, but that's the whole reason why, and if you look at the Wikipedia, it brings it up, and that's why I kind of want to say it. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they're the group that deals with the whole hate group and things like that. And it's like, guys, it can't be a hate crime to target police officers because, well, it's a job. It's not your identity that you can't change. It's controversial. Like I said, I'm not saying that Blue Lives Matter is wrong. I'm not saying that any of these movements are wrong. What I'm saying is that in some of the ways that things are approached and the language used, it gets a little muddy. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. I know, like I said, I'm trying to be very cautious and deliberate in my wording. So if I did offend anyone with the stuff I've said so far, I'm sorry. That was not my intention. I just simply am trying to bring forward some social movements within the criminal justice field to kind of give a connecting force between All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter. The idea here, regardless of what group it is, understands that there is a problem in the criminal justice system. There is a breakdown in this system where individuals are not safe. That is the one thing they agree on. Black Lives Matter say, hey, the community of individuals who have darker complexion, typically black, but they will also admit Latinx is included in this, are being disproportionately have violence against them from police officers. Blue Lives Matter is saying, hey, our police officers are getting targeted by individuals and they're being attacked, and that's not safe. So you need to remember they're still important. They need to be safe. And then All Lives Matter is just saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. Everyone's equal. There's some problems, but everyone's equal. Let's not ignore anyone. They're trying to be Switzerland. They're trying to be neutral the whole time. That's the basic breakdown. Like I said, no one is right or wrong on this. It's just the ways you approach things get crazy. If you say all lives matter, it seems like you're belittling one of the other groups. If you say Black Lives Matter, you seem like you're focusing on one group. If you say Blue Lives Matter, you tend to focus on that group and not the other. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that these groups have usually, and I say usually, good intentions, because that's my other terrible segue into, if you've seen it, ACAB or 1312, which is All Cops Are Bastards. Yeah. This, again, is another thing that has way older roots than anything else than people tend to remember. So it does come from a time in Britain, in England, a pre-punk era where you were anti-police. That really it's shown up and keeps coming back up at different times in our history. With the rise of police brutality cases and the rise of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter, ACAB has been thrown up quite a few times. And some people have referred to Black Lives Matter as an ACAB movement. It is not inherently, ladies and gentlemen, please remember that, as we've said already. The ACAB movement is very straightforward. There's no redeemable quality about any police officer. They are all terrible and they shouldn't be there. Now, again, this is one that's very different from the others. The other ones we've talked about so far are more, they have a good meaning behind it. This one is strictly negative. I've seen people throw it up a couple times, so I'm just making sure that you're aware of what it is if you see it somewhere or you hear it. So if you are planning to go into, specifically policing in your criminal justice career from here, that if you see ACAB, there's a higher chance that there will be some kind of, violence or language or pretty much a lot of things that are negative. I don't want to talk too much about ACAB. If you're interested in it, you can look up a lot of stuff. But it's usually used in particular with like nihilists or, what are they called? The people that are anti-society. The anarchists. Don't know why it came to me that way. These are people that don't believe in a system that works. So just keep that in mind. But now I want to change focus completely and talk about a very different type of group that is in the criminal justice field and is, I would argue, equally as controversial as Black Lives and Blue Lives Matter, but not for the reason you think. And for that, I'd like to talk about the Innocence Project. So if you are someone who is familiar with the Innocence Project or is interested in the legal aspect, so going into like the courts and sentencing and all that stuff, if that's what you're interested in, this is something that will really hopefully pique your interest. The Innocence Project, this is their official website, much like Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter. I wanted to give you their actual website so that you saw, you know what, I'll post a link for all three of the main websites in Blackboard. So the Innocence Project itself they're multifolded, or rather multifaceted. What that means is that they have more than one thing, but people tend to know about one part in particular. And so the Innocence Project is most famous for wrongful convictions. They're the people that get criminals who have been in the system for a while, they get them released from prison, whether it's due to faulty evidence, mishandled case, new DNA evidence, new, like, whatever it may be. It gets people off of either death row or long sentences. And so this does cover a little bit into, I know some of you have expressed interest in, individuals of color who are still in the system for owning marijuana, despite the fact that, it's a different world now. So this is something that the Innocence Project is kind of part of, not directly the marijuana charges, but a lot of other things are part of this. So the Innocence Project is big and known for releasing prisoners and giving them fair representation over the years. So that's kind of the big thing I want to talk about here. So they do take on cases of individuals who claim to be innocent but are still in prison and things like that because, well, something happened or the case was found one way. This is not everyone wins. And that's important to note, is that not everyone who the Innocence Project takes on does get released from prison. Not everyone that the Innocence Project starts working with is truly innocent. The whole thing is making sure that the system itself is truly equal for everyone. And so they even say right here and there about the whole goal is to free the innocent, prevent wrongful convictions, and create fair, compassionate, and equitable systems of justice for everyone. And so 100%, it's grounded in science and grounded in anti-racism, because that's the one thing that we've already discussed with, marijuana charges, as well as some other things, that there is a disproportionately high number of people of color versus white individuals in prisons. And so they work with all groups. It's not just the one. But yeah, so their mission is to make things better. They are constantly also trying to change how the proceedings go. So they do put forward cases that go to the Supreme Court, as we've learned, to get laws and other things seen as whether constitutional or not. So this is kind of one of those, can we make a change? Do they have a right? Do we have a right? How does this work? So while they are trying to release individuals who were innocent and are unfortunately imprisoned in our system, they are trying to change the way the system works now so that it doesn't continue to put people who are innocent in jail. And it is also looking at those changes and seeing what is going on in society and what do we need to follow on and what do we need to be careful with. Exonerate, that's the word I couldn't think of. But truly, their mission is to bring a better understanding of the system and try to correct wrongs that have happened. So I will be 100% honest with you. This is the one time I'll get pseudo political. I support the Innocence Project. I very much believe, looking at a lot of different statistics, both from them and from the other hundreds of places you can get information, there is a decently large number of individuals in prison who are innocent. Yeah, the old saying, well, everyone says they're innocent. There are a good number of people who truly are. And our system, while robust and we've seen how it's designed, there are still issues within it that have led to people being wrongfully convicted. And I do believe everyone has a fair chance. And considering the number of trials and whatnot that I've read into and watched documentaries on, and have actually read some of the briefings and publicly available information on some cases, there are cases where even I look at it and I go, there's no way that this person truly was guilty. Why the heck did this go through? So I personally see value in the Innocence Project. Again, not everyone will, and that's okay. But that's why I said this is like the only time I'm going to get pseudo political and say I support the Innocence Project, and I think it's something worth looking into if you're interested in fairness in the criminal justice field. All right. That covers just a few, just a reminder of what we did talk about here. We talked about the Innocence Project. We talked about the ACAB movement belief that all cops are bastards, which I disagree with, but whatever. The Blue Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter, and the All Lives Matter movement. Those are the 5 that we talked about here in this little video. If you know of another one that I didn't talk about, and there are plenty out there, please feel free to bring it up in the discussion board. Give us a little background about it too, because, well, even if I've heard of it, maybe someone else hasn't. So give us some information on it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on, in particular, like the Innocence Project, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter movement, and then even the All Lives Matter movement. I'm sure most of you have feelings about ACAB. If you want to talk about that one, that's fine. But I'd really prefer you talk about either Innocence Project or one of the Lives Matter movements. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, this week was supposed to be lighter. I wanted you to be able to focus on your midterm and get that done rather than worrying about some other content. So next week, we will go into our next chapter, which is on policing and a little bit of the history of policing. So look forward to that. But anyway, have a wonderful day, week, weekend, night, mid-morning, fourth meal, whatever it may be. Yeah. Just know, regardless of anything, regardless of what system you believe in or anything like that, know that in this classroom and as a person, I do respect you. Even if you and I don't have the same political beliefs or the same beliefs in our system, I respect you and I expect you to respect each other. So have a healthy discussion, and I'll see you all soon.